was a sad week. First, my godmother Barbara Shaft died Sunday, and and mom is my mom is much better, but still, we have this issue with AmeriGas, and AmeriGas has been hiking up our rates, and don't need to do that now. And went from Michael Sharp, the CEO, came through and he stopped the people from doing that, and now it's like they got to him, and he's being an AmeriGas robot and not responding to anything. And then, of course, now George Wendt died. Now, George Wendt was one of my favorite characters. George Wendt played Norm Peterson. Yep, Norm on Cheers. Norm on Cheers. Say that again and again and again. Norm on Cheers. Norm. And what was amazing about Norm was that uh, Norm really was, he was the guy that walked in and he had his place at the bar. Okay. Nobody else sat where Norm sat. And if they did, Norm would come in, he would say, "Oh, that's my spot." And very rarely did anyone not move. And if they didn't, Sam, played by Ted Danson, would come over and say, "Hey, that's Norm's spot. He has a spot." But what I find particularly memorable about Cheers was that it really, as good shows tend to do, reflected an era. There will not be that era again unless the internet is killed. Seriously. Cheers' first program started, it was September of 1982. That was my second year, my sophomore year at Texas Arlington. I graduated from Skyline High in class of 80. And that was my first time going to bars. And in Arlington, we had J.R. Bentley's, which I don't believe is still there now. I have to double check. And they had their norm. In other words, a guy I didn't know. I know it was one guy, I think his name was Rob, who always came in the afternoons to watch sports, and he always had his place near the cash register. And that was my hang. J.R. Bentley's became my hang. And if it wasn't that, it was the Dry Gulch. But the Dry Gulch was different because even though it was a pub, it was more a dance place, right? So, but the question is who became the cheers of that place? And then, well, Dave, a number of Daves come to mind. My friend Dave, who was Texas Arlington classmate, then myself. Then we come to Oakland. And I have to note this because I didn't go out all the time. I spent a lot of time in the library at Texas Arlington. But when I hit grad school, I wasn't quite there, but when I got my first job, the Golden Bear opened in Oakland. That was opened in 85. I graduated from Cal in 87. And I went to the Golden Bear. And I went to the Balboa Cafe in San Francisco in 1988. That was the full flowering of the norms. Every bar had its norm. The Royal Exchange had its norm. There was a guy named Ben. Um, so Zen, what do you think about this when we talk about economics? Always sat in the same place. You go in the Royal Exchange at Sacramento in front. To this day, he's not there, but you go in, and he always sat on the other side of the second section of bars, like two squares, one here, right? And you go around, and he was always there's a corner here. He would sit near the corner. That was his place. And he had another friend whose name I forgot who would sit with him. They were the norms of the Royal Exchange. The Golden Bear had norms. I think of my buddy Richard Lieberman. He was a norm there. Richard, Skyline High grad, class of 80 with me, and perhaps you if you're watching this, right? And then there were, and we were wondering, who would say, can a norm be a woman? Yeah, there are female norms, not as often in those days because, women tend to run in packs. A norm is generally by themselves. If a woman is a norm, the woman knows the bartender or is dating the bartender. So the woman just, or the woman has a posse of female friends. Okay. But generally, you have guys that come in solo and they sit down. They don't even know the bartender by that well, but they get to know the bartender because they come and they sit there all the time. All right. And they pick up all kinds of stuff. That's what norms do. So, my question to you is, who in Oakland was the norm? For me, the norm was Richard Lieberman. Again, because he was known at the Golden Bear, known at Krogan's in Montclair. Richard was also known at Johnny Matheny's places in San Francisco as well, like the Blue Light, which is the Blue Light to this day. And I have to get Johnny Matheny on and ask him about that because this is a passing of an era. This is a time when the internet wasn't even born yet. Cheers aired in 1982. Norms were a norm before Cheers, but with the hold on a second. I'll be there. I'm making a quick video. I'm making a quick video. I'll be there in a second. I'm all okay. Anyway, things you got to do. So anyway, um, so now in those days we were all bachelors. We were all the bachelors, and the fun part about it was that people got to know you by how often you walked in. Unless, of course, you were in media like me or somebody else. Then the chances are they read you. Because I was writing for the Montclarian starting in 93 through 96. But it was a heck of a lot of fun. I remember one night at the Golden Bear, I walked in, and Jerry Fagoni, who owned the bar, was holding court talking about cow rugby. And as would happen, a game of liar's dice would break out. If you ever played liar's dice or not. But liar's dice has the dice come in these cups, and you shake the cup and you turn it over, boom, boom, like that, right? And you do it and your friend does it. And you have to guess of the five dice, it's like how many there are of a certain type, okay? Like for example, do you have two aces, right? Or do you have two sixes, okay? And I would guess, and if I were right, you lost a die. So we went from 5 to 4, and that's how I went. Well, we started that game, and then more guys came in. And of that group, they joined us. And this happened like 6 more times to where we had an 18-man game of liar's dice. Now, a woman could have jumped in. I think one woman did jump in. All right. We had an 18-person liar's dice game that, because of the number of people, went on for the rest of the night until 4 in the morning. I kid you not. Just when you thought it was going to die down, it just kept going. It was ludicrously hilarious. It just kept on freaking going. That was fun. Cheers was popular because it reflected the society, and then society reflected it back. And that's rare. You have, I think, tentpole programs like um, they tend to do that. Popular ones in history in different ways. Star Trek did that in its way. Um, the Tom Selleck program, uh, did that. The Blue Bloods did that in its way. Law and Order does that expertly. They reflect the society, and the society reflects back. Taxi did that. Sanford and Son did that really well. Okay. In fact, I think of all the programs Norman Lear, and they did that probably better than most. Definitely. And then there was Cheers. Cheers was formed because the bar scene was forming, because the single dating life was becoming a thing, and it had its norms. Double entendre intended. So that's what I think about when I think of norm. I think of how it represented an era, it defined the era, and the era defined it. And George Wendt was part of that. He was the master of ceremonies. He was the guy that represented the rest of us. The guy that always had a kind word or a quip or an observation, or sometimes he just didn't say much at all. But he always had the place he sat, and you always knew his name. Who was the norm in Oakland to you? Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube and bookmark oaklandnewsonline.com and zenreport.com. I'll see you.